I am so excited to introduce Robert Jacobson. Robert, take it away.
Thank you very much, Molly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shaping the $1 Trillion Space Economy. I'm Robert Jacobson, and thank you for joining us today at AI Showbiz Summit. I'm a space advocate, investor, and entrepreneur. Let me tell you just a bit about me. I lead Space Advisors, which is an accelerator in a box. And I'm a core team member of Arc Mission Foundation, which Molly is actually also a part of. We're backing up Earth civilization and have several space missions under our belt, which sound like science fiction, but they're real. One is we put in a library inside Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster, which is now in space. It's the first version of our solar library. We installed a lunar library last April 2019. It was unfortunately crashed as part of Space IL. But the library, we believe, is intact. It contains a 30 million page archive of human history, civilization, covering all sorts of subjects, cultures, nations, languages, genres over many time periods. We have many more fascinating future missions that include partnerships with one of our panelists. We'll maybe get to touch on that. I build communities in and around the space sector. I was a managing member of an investment group focused on below the radar opportunities. And I'm also a new author sharing my insights along with 100+ other industry leaders in my upcoming book, Space is Open for Business. I want to thank the summit for sharing that video earlier about it. This panel was originally scheduled for South by Southwest on March 20th, but due to COVID, it was canceled. So I really want to thank Molly and her partners and producers for extending the invitation to bring the panel to you today, because space really is open for business to all. And although we don't necessarily focus on AI, I think that, space is going to be an area that will really need AI. Really excited to have a fantastic group of leaders here with us today who are shaping the space economy. So briefly, how did I get involved with space? I'm not an engineer. I attended the very first flight of Spaceship One, which was the first privately funded spacecraft to go to the edge of space, 62 miles above sea level, or 100 kilometers. And that was a spontaneous moment in history. I was an eyewitness there, along with thousands of other people out there in the Mojave. It was exhilarating to watch. And it really dawned on me that it changed my life. And I realized that no longer it was just government and agencies that would have the exclusive domain and leadership in space. At the moment, I didn't really know how I would be involved or how I could be involved. But I knew I absolutely had to be in it, and it changed my life forever. I couldn't walk away, and I was determined to orient my life so that I could be space focused. And even again, if I didn't know what that looked like. And I also thought a lot about the good that space could do for the world. So now in this challenge time, we're especially reminded that I think we need space more than ever, and we can learn a lot from space, and it's going to be a great conversation today. So I really feel that it's imperative you start today giving consideration of what our future economy could look like and entail, including more space involved with it. But let's look briefly at the market. We still have NASA, government space, incumbent players. There's a ton of new energy going into space, growing markets, and some of these markets include private space platforms, in-space services, which is things like in-space fueling and manufacturing, private human spaceflight, new weather forecasting capabilities, internet from space, data analytics from space assets, and a whole lot more. So I really believe and assert that space could be a $1 trillion space opportunity within a decade and become a dominant thematic area for the 21st century. But why is the industry growing rapidly? Because we have this radically reduced cost and time to get to space through groups like SpaceX. It's not only becoming less expensive, but more predictable and easier to leverage space. Thinking of space as an enabler and how to create applications from space. We're also at a point where you don't need to be a billionaire to start a space company, and there are ways for the rest of us to play with space. And our esteemed panelists today have some insights on where the opportunities and low-hanging fruit exist. And and friends out there, I wish I could feel you virtually. We're gonna explore these opportunities together today. And I'm curious to know if any of you are investing in the space market. So if you can reach out in some way and let us know. If there's just a few now, I imagine that soon we'll see hundreds of hands. But enough about me. I want to turn it over to these awesome folks on my panel. Lisa Rich, great to see you today.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, Lisa, it wasn't that long ago when we met up in Seattle in January. And like many great entrepreneurs, Lisa, you wear multiple hats. Please tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you. I wanted to start off by wishing everyone May the 4th be with you today. If we have sci-fi fans out there, had to bring that up, just add a little levity. I'm an entrepreneur and investor and strategist. I've been involved in the space industry since 2014, so it's been 6 years, where we went all in to understand on the ground floor who is involved in space, what are they doing, what are the opportunities, and how can we meet and learn from other space investors. So we being my business partner Jeff Rich and myself, set out to look at the opportunity for investing. At this point, we've invested in 18 companies in the space sector, and we're very interested in those technologies that can take us to space, and they're really quite incredible when you go visit the Blue Origin, which we're based in Seattle. You can go visit Blue. You can go visit all the SpaceX facilities, or be at the Spaceport, Florida. And when you see all this happening, and especially Blue Origin, you can really understand why there's so excitement about the space sector. And I would like to congratulate, by the way, Blue Origin and SpaceX and Dynetics today for the nearly $1 billion award that they received for their human landers, on the moon. So we've been invested in the sector with being invested in SpaceX, and then got involved with startups and mentoring startups. And we have really recognized that there are companies that can scale tremendously from traditional space to new space, which is what we call startups today in the space sector. So we have companies like Umbra Lab that can do quarter-meter SAR, synthetic aperture radar, and high-resolution imagery that they can get with a synthetic aperture radar that can see through the clouds. We have Planet IQ that's doing space weather forecasting. We have Axiom Space, which you'll hear about from AMIR BLACHMAN. Basically, when we had Mike Suffredini, the former head of the ISS, saying that he wanted to start a space company, we said, gosh, if you're going to invest in space, you have to go with someone that has been there and that knows how to create a business, and one that is investable. So we look for many different opportunities with companies that not only have the engineering, but that have a strong business strategy and the ability to achieve early revenues. Every company has to have a pathway to revenue. And since we are entrepreneurs and as well as investors, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur, we couldn't stay away long enough until we built our own company, which is now Xplore, providing space as a service. Xplore is an opportunity to send low-cost payloads to the moon, Mars, Venus, and beyond with an orbital spacecraft, an orbiting spacecraft, which we call the X-craft, featured here. This is the X-craft. It's a multi-mission capability so that many partners can come on board a spacecraft and take their payloads to these deep space destinations, which has never been done before at a low cost. So traditionally, we've had NASA performing important Class A missions to achieve top science and knowledge with big, 10-year projects that they're really building out this capability to get answer the questions of the decadal surveys. But we have other opportunities that can be low cost, and so we have designed an ASPA class spacecraft, which is about the size of a dorm room refrigerator that can carry very valuable instruments that can perform missions for many, many customers, which actually is something that our administrator Bridenstine would like to do, is for NASA to be one of many partners to enable commercial space. And I think that's definitely moving in the right direction. So
Lisa, I want to jump in here so we can share more, so we can get to the introductions to everybody else. But thank you very much. I want to introduce my buddy and former colleague from Space Angels days, AMIR BLACHMAN. Wonderful to see you today. AMIR is the Chief Business Officer of Axiom Space. AMIR, want to tell us a bit about yourself and Axiom?
Hey, Robert.
Hey.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you all. And it's good to be here among so many friends, Lisa and Rick, who are investors in us. And Robert, you're my good personal friend and past co-investor. And well, I guess once a co-investor, for a long time, a co-investor. And a lot of friends in the audience, including some of our investors other than Hemisphere, so SpaceFund, Starbridge, friends out there, Brett, Ken, Lindsay, Remco, Rodrigo, Steven. It's good to see all of you guys in the audience. So thanks for being here with us. And so just in terms of brief background that brought me down to the path that I'm on now, I, as a kid, was building model rockets from a very, very early age, took rocketry classes at the California Museum of Science and Industry, which is now the California Science Center, starting when I was 7 years old. And by age 12, I got to fly an F-14 simulator on a military base, and that really hooked me. I then served as an Air Force instructor later on, and eventually became a space investor, and then transitioned back to the operator side of the table when I joined Mike Safardini and Cam Jafarian in their founding Vacuum Space. So I came on as their first employee and junior shareholder. Mike Safardini, as Lisa said, was head of the International Space Station program, and Cam was the owner and founder of SGT, a 2,500 person company that's trained America and other countries' astronauts for the last 20 years. So that really was the genesis of Axiom Space. Mike and Cam working together, seeing that the International Space Station would soon be retired, understanding that there's a real business case for serving the many audiences that use microgravity, and from that came the concept of making availability on ISS more broad until it's retired, and then by 2024 starting to assemble the new station in space. And so I appreciate the very broad support we've gotten from our investors and general community. And again, Robert, thanks for having me as part of this discussion.
Thanks, AMIR. Next, I want to move to my friend Rick Tumlinson, a pioneer, a guy who's initiated and started many ventures and organizations and really helped launch this new space movement. And we were just celebrating his Sweet 16. He's a leap year guy, and we had a nice celebration for him on February 29th. It was probably the last social event I went to of this year. So Rick, great to have you today. I'm assuming you're in Austin, Texas. Please tell us a bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Yes, I am, and sorry we didn't get to do this at South by. Yeah, I guess we have to do a little background. I'm, just a kid from a working class family. Ended up living in New York City and volunteered to work for a guy who had written a book called The High Frontier named Jerry O'Neill many years ago, and worked my way into the space field that way. And along the way, I've just been incredibly privileged and lucky to be both in the right place at the right time and around some amazing people. Dr. O'Neill, maybe we can hit on later on, is sort of the godfather of soul of everything that you're seeing, I believe, as far as new space, private sector, the opening of the frontier. As I went along, I got invited to join the founding board of the X Prize, and got involved in a lot of different projects after that. Helped kickstart a little project that discovered ice in the craters of the moon, and then led a team. We took over the Russian space station for a little while. We got our asses kicked, but we had it for a little while. And along the way, I was lucky enough to sign up a guy named Dennis Tito to buy the first ticket to go to the station. We have an organization, Space Frontier Foundation, New Worlds Institute, other things I work on. But really right now I'm doing this one. This is the hat I'm wearing today, literally. And, oh, by the way, Lisa, thank you for reminding me. It's
May the 4th.
Yeah. Okay, get away, get away. It's not stopping. All right, good. Anyway, SpaceFund is actually a venture capital company. We're designed to support and invest in what we call frontier enabling companies, companies that are going to lead the way, participate, and in a way profit from the realization of what we call the space revolution. And the bottom line on that is just that we're at a tipping point moment, we're at a fulcrum moment, whatever you want to call it. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that in the panel, so I won't go there. But our goal is to eventually enable as many people as we can to invest in and profit from the opening of the frontier.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rick. And, you know, just referring to Dennis Tito, I think last week, April 29th, was the anniversary of his flight, April 29th, 2001, of Dennis Tito's flight to the space station. So just as a, and May 1st was International Space Day, and then today we have May the 4th. So let's kick things off.
I just noticed that there were people in the audience asking where we're at.
We lost Amir for someone on audio. I think he was saying, where are people at? Well, I'm in Santa Monica, California. Rick is in Austin. Lisa, I will assume, is in Seattle. Yes?
Yes.
Amir, you back with us? Uh-oh, Amir.
Amir, try turning off your virtual background. Oh, wait, for a moment. And or your video. If you turn off your video for a moment, that might help if you can hear me. And we'll text Amir. Robin. Okay,
I'll jump in with some questions while you guys sort it out with Robin and Molly to work out with Amir. Let's just, the first one. So what are some of the challenges and limitations that are presently in the sector? And now we have COVID, which probably adds definitely a new variable, and I want to connect that with maybe what are some of the potential near-term opportunities. Lisa or Rick, you want to jump in here? And
well, I'd just like to say that COVID is unusual for space industry professionals. We tend to be a quiet bunch and working with our heads down and working on engineering and strategy. And so it has not affected, in our case, I think the space industry might prove to be more resilient than most during this environment, especially because and from a funding perspective, companies that are startups are often working on proposals for winning non-dilutive funding. We have Barbara Barrett, our Secretary of the Air Force, and Dr. Will Roper that have put some tremendous avenues in place and pathways to commercialization for early stage companies. So that is, you know, people talk about the PPP program and how people are going to survive, but there is in place a method for progress for space companies that is beyond traditional funding paths. So I think they're going to prove to be more resilient.
Great, and good to see that Amir is back. Amir, we were just asking about, you know, what are some of the near-term challenges and opportunities in a new space sector. And I know I see it, Rick is actually making a good reference. Rick, I know you published something just on space news, and that kind of ties all this in.
Yeah. So it is, and probably this is, in fact, certainly, this is the same for almost every business in every field, whether you're a restaurateur or you're building space components. It is a Darwinian event. There's going to be a lot of people that don't make it through the other side of this. And by the way, my heart goes out to anybody who's lost a relative or is currently ill with the disease. I say that as an asthmatic, so I'm staying home. I'm staying home. I'm not hitting the roads out there. But I can tell you this. I believe that our culture is essentially very resilient, and I think the people in the space field epitomize that. And so I believe that what's going to come out of this in our field is that we're going to have a stronger industry, and we're going to see some initiatives that are more unifying as we move out, as I do believe around the world is going to occur. I think that forget the politicians and the other idiots in charge out there. The people, the thought leaders, the innovators are going to be leveraging off of this global event to begin to do some really great things.
Thanks, Rick. Amir, you want to jump in? And Amir, where are you speaking to us from today, just so that our audience knows where you're at?
Yeah. So I'm with you here in Los Angeles. Axiom's headquarters are in Houston, but we have offices in Los Angeles, DC, and Florida. So I'm in Los Angeles. Thanks for asking. And gesture to me if my audio or video starts cutting out again, just so I know to switch connections. But you asked about the challenges and limitations present in the sector. I'll speak specifically to what we're doing, which is enabling people to utilize ISS and later on Axiom Station. One major challenge is the low awareness of the benefit that space has to offer, both from a business standpoint, but to all life on Earth. I mean, there's about, depending how you measure it, about 500 million a year that's done in research on ISS today. About 300, which is NASA direct research, and 200 million, which is other commercial and subsidized research. And that is with nobody knowing what the benefits are of microgravity in innovating in pharmaceuticals, life sciences for human factors and animal factors in space, bioprinting, materials innovation and fiber optics and superalloys. And so if we could just raise the awareness around the world from 0.1% to 2%, all of a sudden it just becomes a much more massive business, and we're on the way to doing that. And so that's one of the big business potentials behind what we're building. But that lack of awareness is still a challenge, but we'll get there.
Amir, you had worked. Amir, you'd worked in the pharmaceutical industry before your days with space. Specifically, do you think that there are some things that could be where the pharmaceutical industry is unaware of how space could further benefit them, or vice versa?
There are a few specifics in the pharma realm. One is space offers an opportunity to do a bunch of things that really help us understand how to better develop pharmaceuticals. So, for example, one is pulling gravity out of the equation. So when you look at cells in space and you pull gravity out of the equation and you see how those cells act differently than how they act on Earth, that tells you about certain characteristics. If you grow protein crystals in space, you get a more pure protein crystal, and that helps with various forms of identification of parts of metabolic processes and help pharmaceutical developers understand what processes or receptor points or other things like that to focus on when they're developing new pharmaceuticals. Another element is in crystal growth related element is that there are crystals you can grow in space that are longer than those that are on Earth. So you can change the efficacy by altering drug delivery and how the molecules are absorbed in the body. So there are a bunch of things you can do on the pharma side. Also in space, you don't have gravity. So you can produce spheres of tissue in space that are bigger than what you can do on Earth, and even flat tissues in space that are bigger than what you can do on Earth, because you don't have the scaffolding issue of tissues compressing themselves like you do on Earth. So you have better animal modeling in these tissues than you do on Earth in much smaller samples. So that's part of it. The other thing that's been a challenge is launch cost. So if you look at a study NASA Ames did about 1.5 years ago, led by Harry Jones, there's, the data shows that Vanguard in the 1950s cost about $800,000 per kilo to get things to space. shuttle cost about $105,000 per kilo. The Falcon 9 today, about $25,000 per kilo. And these are unlading costs, right? So if you ask the practitioner, they probably take these numbers and exactly double them. But essentially, you know, at a cost of $50,000, $60,000 per kilo to get stuff to space today, you're still limited to where a new product would pencil out in terms of, is this a profitable product to develop and produce in space? But as more of SpaceX's rocket becomes reusable, so right now the booster is reusable, the fairings are sort of reusable depending on how they're captured, but as more and more of the rocket becomes reusable and more of the cost of the rocket can be amortized across 3 missions and then 10 missions and then 50 missions, that cost comes way, way, way down. Not because new tech is developed necessarily, but or say not because exotic new technology is developed, but because we get better at understanding how to reuse a rocket. So example, if you want to pull some fiber optics in space and the cost to get that up and down from space, the glass up and down from space is $60,000, and now that comes down to $30,000, all of a sudden it gets a lot easier to make that product profitable, and more companies will want to do things like that. So so that's really something that's going to remove one of the big limitations, is the continued drop in launch cost, and like I said, the greater awareness of what it is that can be done in space.
Thanks, Amir. So Lisa and Rick, what are some of the ideas though driving what Amir was discussing in terms of, you know, this in terms of, you know, reduced access, you know, cost of access to space? Yeah.
Well, look, one, I'm going to build on what Amir was saying, especially since he's got the station behind his head.
And
there.
I'd love for you to mention O'Neill too, because I think this is actually kind of like, it's like we're starting to see Jerry's dream maybe being realized. It's like this long burn, the several decade long burn.
Right. And look, here's a couple of facts that, and I'm going to be vague. Don't pin me on the exact numbers, but that station that's behind Amir, without their module there, as it is today, roughly it takes about 2.75 people just to keep the lights on. And normally on the station you have between 3 and 6 people, which again roughly translates to 1/4 of one person to 3 1/4 people that have available time to be creative, do experiments, you know, come up with ideas, create IP, create value. So, and even then, the list that Amir was going through of the great things that have been come up with, been created so far, is pretty amazing. So imagine if, let's say Elon, building his Starship, I know he wants to go to Mars, but I don't freaking care if he goes to Mars. But if he's able to get 50 or 100 or 1,000 people a year into low Earth orbit, we're moving into a human renaissance. There's just no doubt about it. The ability to put people in that domain, in that place, where they can do so many new things, they create new things, is going to be as unimaginable as when the, this may not be politically correct, but when the Pilgrims were cruising up and down the coast of North America, you know, they could see forests and think, wow, we could do some stuff with that wood. They had no idea what would come out of this quote unquote new world we're in once people were able to live here and create things here, little things like democracy, the internet, you know, little things. So I think that possibility, as we are able to drop the cost and move from rockets and launch to spaceships, you notice the difference there, by the way, is you don't throw away parts of your ship. So once we move to spaceships and the ability to go to and from space regularly, reliably, repeatedly, and eventually safely, we're going to see the opening of the frontier. And then I think it's going to be kind of interesting because Amir and his team, for example, are ahead of the curve right now, trying to put this little module. If we get that kind of a breakout where we have 50, 100,000 people going into orbit, Amir is going to be like in the middle of a housing crunch in space. You know, we're going to have a housing shortage for all of the different activities. So I think we're on the edge of something really exciting.
That housing shortage is already there, and so Rick, I'm happy you brought that point up about person person hours in space and what the innovation today is versus where it could be. So it's exactly like you said, on any given time, we have typically a complement of somewhere between 5 and 6 people on ISS. And a lot of that time is spent on just maintaining the machine. And so now think about what happens when we just double that to 5 people. And it's, obviously not a huge stretch conceptually to do that. So mid-late next year, our first mission to ISS goes up. It'll have 4 people on board, and that'll be a 10-person mission. So already you've got another at least 3 people who are available to do that productive work. And so they'll be on ISS, which is what you see in the picture right now. Then in 2024, the first part of our station that you see joining right there comes up. That's the node. And and that's actually the Earth Observatory that's being unfurled. Within a few months of that piece coming up, our first habitation module comes up, and that's what you see right there being birthed on by a robotic arm. That will hold an additional 8 people. And so immediately the capacity goes up significantly. And these new modules that go up, what we're calling the commercial segment that eventually separates off and becomes Axiom Station, is a modern station, requires a lot less human activity in terms of maintaining it, almost no extravehicular or spacewalk activity to maintain it, because all of that plumbing and computation that's on the outside of ISS is on the inside of our station. And so what we're going to see in a very, very short time, we're talking about 3.5 years from now, we'll see a spike all of a sudden in the availability of what innovators can do in space. And then the idea is every number of years after that to double the number of people in space. And I don't want to say how many years that is, because that's going to depend somewhat on the market. But that housing shortage that you're talking about is already there. So we've got a transportation shortage, we've got a housing shortage, and those who are in the business now of building railroads and real estate are going to be doing very well. And I think that's why Lisa and your organization, Rick, and others have chosen to invest.
Well, absolutely. I mean, once the opportunity is there and there's a way to go to space, the floodgates are open. Once the opportunity, you've got SpaceX with the Crew module going up, and we're finally getting our astronauts to the ISS from the U.S. Ground, soil, going up to the ISS, and then your astronauts that you're going to train with Axiom will be going to the ISS. Once that we've proven out the model, everyone wants to go. So, and I think that there are a lot of people waiting in the wings for that, just to turn the spigot on. And same thing with beyond Earth orbit. We're talking a lot here about human applications for how we benefit humanity with what we do in space. And that's human exploration, but it begins as well with robotic exploration. Certainly it's the robots that have to bring back the data that make it safe to go to space. So we're very interested in the experiments that are going on the ISS with human tissue, testing nematodes to see what our digestive tract is going to do in microgravity and beyond. We have to learn how to do additive printing, like our investment in Made in Space, where you can do in-space manufacturing. And then Orbit Fab is on-orbit refueling, so that you can have what I like to coin as no lack of propellant anxiety, because we have a spacecraft that are orbiting and they don't have a lot of propellant in low Earth orbit. So let's refuel them and on orbit, because why don't we have gas stations in space? There's so many applications, but we have to bring that data back. We have to bring the knowledge back to benefit humanity. So everything we do in space ultimately does have a value on Earth. And I think a lot of people don't really equate that they don't understand that using your cell phone every day with the GPS is not using a cell phone tower. It's using a geosynchronous satellite to know where you are, to know your location. So kind of interesting, you order a pizza, you're using a phone that's telling you where the driver is on a geosynchronous satellite. And separately, like with Xplore, we are building a GPS architecture for the moon. doesn't exist right now. You can't use GPS at the moon, so that's what we're doing in a study with the Air Force to point and navigate and task to know where your satellite is beyond Earth orbit. So, all of these things are architectures that need to be built and data we need to bring back so that we know where our landing sites are, that we know where, at a granular level, how safe we're going to be when humans put their feet on the ground, and many of them can live and work in space. As Jeff Bezos says, to have millions of people living and working in space. We love that idea, but it all starts with a process and a safe process to make sure that we succeed.
Thanks, Lisa. And we'll jump in here. This conversation, I think many of the other ones are being transcribed today, and they're going to go on a future space mission as part of the ARC mission, and hopefully some of our partners will. They'll be the conversation will be transcribed and coded to a disk, or will last for billions of years, and will be placed in hopefully different places around the solar system as part of our extension of this library. So anything you do say today is kind of going down for the semi-permanent record. And I want to thank Lisa Rich and Xplore, who are one of the partners the ARC mission works with. We'll be flying with them in the future.
And I just have to mention that Barren Sheet lander was not a fail at all, because the ARC mission materials that were on Barren Sheet included a portrait of my business partner, Jeff. And so when you told him that his face is now on the moon, we were overjoyed.
Awesome. So something important that I just want to jump right into is with all the transitions going on in our economy, socially, politically going on, I think it's a great time for people to think about what they want to achieve in this life, and perhaps those who are maybe thinking about even a career switch, how they could get involved with this. So could you speak to the audience on how people could maybe get involved who've never thought about being part of the space sector? And I talk about some of these ideas in my book, of which I will also have to stand up to show it to you, which all the panelists are here, are in the book, Space is Open for Business, trying to get that there. So Lisa, how can people not from this community, how can welcome you to you're an insurance broker, you're maybe you cut hair, maybe you're a software engineer. How could you, let's dream up of some ways that people can get involved, whether passively or actively, to help make Earth different by better leveraging space.
Sure. Well, there's so many opportunities to meet people and engage, and the space community is unusually friendly. We're small. You can get to know people very easily in the sector and quickly learn who knows who and how to get connected. And certainly your book, Robert, is a walk through a lot of these people that are the networkers in space, and the people that are accessible and want to bring newcomers into the fold. So the events that we've all been a part of, Rick, you and I were at New Space last year, and we speak at events. There are so many space events, SmallSat, the IAC, which is the International Astronautical Congress, where the entire world shows up. Every space agency in the world is there, and it's pretty much like Epcot, where you're at a booth for the Australian Space Agency, and you hear an announcement that Japan is serving sushi, and you go down the aisle and you go to the Japanese, to JAXA, and you get to talk to the heads of space agencies and learn what they're doing. And the companies, startups are there. There are pitch sessions that are there. Sadly, we're not here in Austin right now. You're there, Rick, but we were all going to be at the Capital Factory for that's a venture group that was supporting AFWorks and their Spark Collider and other events that AF Pitch Days are happening. There's so many, not just accelerators. People have heard of Starburst, and they have an accelerator program, and many other opportunities for you can find accelerators in space. But there are funds that have we do programs. So once you learn someone, you're kind of plugged into the ecosystem, I would say. I mean, I'm part of Seattle Space Gals. I've got people on my Gal network that have built planes, and they're aerospace engineers, and they're astronauts, and you can quickly get plugged into this environment.
Thanks so much. So it sounds like hitting some live events, conferences, and we're all friendly, approachable people. You can find us online and start engaging. AMIR, how can people start getting involved if they want to at different levels?
I would look back at the internet in the late 90s and very early 2000s, where you just had to make a little bit of an effort to understand the internet better than the next person, and all sorts of opportunities opened up. If you knew a little bit about HTML or a little bit about building a website, all of a sudden you could become a marketer for a million companies, literally. If you just knew how to do this thing, how to work with a web host, or how to work with Dreammaker, or stuff that people just didn't know how to do yet. That's one example. Another example, or another path to take, is instead of leaving what you're doing to try and go to space, find out what's offered by space and how you can utilize that for the current company you work for. Right? When the economy goes bad, it's especially important to demonstrate to your own employer the additional value that you bring to the company. That's job security. It's a revenue creator. So, find out what it is that's being done on station or in other areas in space that can benefit the business you're working for. And there are direct applications for agriculture and utilities, transportation and traffic management, water management, commodity management. There are consumer applications for direct advertising. I can just imagine somebody working at Clear Channel, let's say, big outdoor billboard manager and advertising traffic manager, and them understanding, well, there's all this data coming down from space about traffic patterns and parking lots and where people are moving about outdoors. And so how can I dynamically price the advertising that we're selling to the major advertisers in the world more efficiently than what's being done now? How can I make our product more competitive than other outdoor advertisers? And take that example and then apply it to absolutely any industry. The same thing. What would I do as a chemical engineer or as a pharmaceutical primary investigator if I was unshackled from gravity? What could I do that a competitor couldn't do? What product would I create that a competitor couldn't create? And so I think those are some of the things that people can do both to get involved. Those are the things that make an individual more valuable. And it's also a way for somebody to make a significant social impact. Is if you can find a technology that is really improving the quality of life on Earth because it mitigates disaster, it mitigates hunger, it provides medical solutions, then you can really merge meaning with economic opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks, Amir. Rick, want to chime in here?
Yeah, I just realized I was typing an answer just to the panelists, but look, the Church of Space has open doors, so come on in. We do speak some weird languages. We believe in something we can't prove, which is that opening the frontier is going to enable us to go to the next level of civilization and save the planet. But we're incredibly optimistic, incredibly friendly, and we need new blood and new ideas. And I think both what Amir and Lisa said is very applicable. The main thing is to go for it. Whether it's now or after the tipping point when the transportation costs drop and it starts to get down to $100 a pound, something like that, to go into space, then things are going to open up dramatically. So start preparing now. I started as a volunteer. I don't have a space degree. I got into it and worked my way in. And, frankly, as long as you don't try and violate the laws of physics, you have a reasonable personality, and, every once in a while you make sense, people are going to let you hang around and you can be a participant. But you can also invest through us or other vehicles to get involved that way. And as I put in the chat here, join the Mars Society, the National Space Society, Space Frontier Foundation.
Oh, advocacy days.
Yeah, and join some of these advocates.
Planetary Society has advocacy days where you get to go to DC and meet the congresspeople and senators and really promote the space industry and learn more about what we're spending on space is our taxpayer dollars, where they go. Sorry, Rick, didn't mean to.
No, that's fine. It's fine. And several of the other groups, Space Frontier and National Space Society, have a thing in March. And by the way, it is really cool because they coach you, they walk you up and down the halls of Congress, you meet your representative, and you get to express your passion in a way that only you can. And it's a very powerful thing to do. But the key thing is just don't give up. Don't give up. Just get in the game and stay in the game. Eventually, you will find your way around.
That was a message from the very first talk this morning about tenacity and never giving up your dream, and keep showing up and not giving up is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Just real quickly, I way back in college, I met a guy named Gene Roddenberry, and I happened to be backstage with him, and I had blown off my class. I was a terrible student. And I asked him, I said, look, I really want to do this O'Neill stuff and Star Trek, and I'm not a great student and everything. I said, what can I do? He said, look, stick to your dream, never give up. Your past is not your future. It's where you come from. I said, yeah, but really? And he said, you know what? You know what my job used to be before Star Trek? And I said, what? He said, I was an LAPD police officer. He said, you can do it. You just got to go for it.
Thanks, Rick.
Wanted to mention that Gene Roddenberry's wife is going to be on our first flight. The ashes of Majel Roddenberry are flying on Xplore's first flight. And this is actually an area of interest to a lot of people. Is cremains are a popular way to honor your deceased and loved ones, is to send them to the heavens. And that's what we're going to do for Gene's wife.
Awesome. So we don't have like a ton of time left. The panel is, unfortunately, we have about 8 minutes. So I want to thank the summit producer, Molly Lavick, for having us today. And I know there seems like there's a strong interest in space, and we're happy to continue these conversations in places like Twitter. The questions we can't answer, we can get to there. And there's a strong interest at the summit in generally just promoting humanity and forging a better future. This panel is also, I think, tentatively participating in an executive roundtable on May 6th at 12 p.m. Pacific for those who are participating. I want to jump into some questions here because I think it's really important because people seem really eager to get in the questions. I'm going to start with one from a Hayward. It's a different type of question. I like this. How can the industry align itself early on with medical and social justice? It's easy to understand the opportunities for innovation and profit, but a lot of that affects population on Earth and in space will require attention to the concerns and issues that we're currently struggling with socially and politically to actually pay off. And I see Rick nodding his head. I want Rick and Amir, Rick or Amir, you want to fight for this first one? Politely fight in a Zoom type of duel.
Real quick, I do want to. I want to plug somebody who's not on the panel, friend of mine and friend of ours, named Dylan Taylor. He's got an organization called Space for Humanity, and they're working really hard to try and open up the frontier. It is very important that all of us in our field make sure that the opportunities to access this frontier are as widely distributed as possible. And I know that Dylan and his team are out there doing that. I'm sure AMIR with the space station and Lisa with her spacecraft are doing their best. I'm sure they've got plans on the table they can tell you about how to let folks like us, regular folks, participate in the excitement.
So there's a conceptual and practical answer to that question. The conceptual answer is, first of all, seeing Earth from space. And I mean that figuratively and literally, is viewing our jewel of a planet without borders and understanding that we are, after all, one biological unit, and that our atmosphere is incredibly fragile, and that we really all do need to take care of ourselves and one another the same. And so just in terms of how space activity influences people's perspective and how it drives people's decision-making and philanthropy is one way that involvement in space and an awareness of the activities of space and Earth from space help us drive towards a more cooperative approach to how we solve problems on Earth. Then there's the practical answer, which is to look at the medical research that's going on in space and the pharmaceutical and the materials research and all the items that I talked about before, and understand how those benefit humanity. So every year, ISS National Laboratory produces a book called Benefits of Space for Humanity, and it's an entire tome dedicated to what outcomes have come from research that have gone on station in the last year that benefit humanity. And so obviously there's too many to list. I mean, there's 200 experiments going on station at any given moment. That's a good book to look at, as is the ISS National Laboratory website, because it opens people's minds and creativity to what it is that each individual can do in terms of projects in orbit, whether you're a high school teacher who wants to turn on students to doing stuff in space, or whether you're a major materials or pharmaceutical company that wants to consider what can be developed in space. So there's that. Now there's also things like the personal missions, where ultra high net worths like Guy Laliberté, the founder of Cirque du Soleil, went to space, and his main push for his week in space was to promote his One Drop Foundation, which is the international foundation for providing clean water to people all over the world. So so there are, and that's not just greenwashing. I mean, he didn't just do that to give fake meaning to his mission. He did it because, and that's in fact why he did the mission, was specifically to promote this. So it was more about what is the best way for me to promote what I'm doing, rather than I'm going to space and what can I do while I'm there. And so I would say that's probably the combination of both on a thematic level of what does it mean to look at Earth from space, on a practical level, what can one do to help the world socially and economically, medically.
Thanks, Amir. And I have a next question I'll start with, and then we'll have Lisa comment on. It was from Dimitri, and I'll paraphrase. He's just about convincing, how do investors get convinced to invest? What type of business plans are they looking for? ROI, IRR. How does it work other than just forgetting the politicians? Cool things to invest that are quite concrete. So I'll start by saying team is super important when you're presenting your plan to potential investors, because investors essentially have lots of things they can compare it to, everything from shopping malls to now space stations, biomedical opportunities. So you have to make your startup, differentiate from others. And in space, the part of space being sexy can only go so far. It has to be a great business. So although there is a certain amount of passion investors, you still have to figure out how it's going to self-sustain itself. Lisa, want to jump in on when you're vetting and looking at plans, what catches your eye and what Hemisphere Ventures is particularly looking for?
Right. Well, you don't invest just on an idea, and it has to have a hardcore business strategy. And what's unusual, though, about the space industry is that for most businesses, there isn't necessarily a revenue that's occurring right away. And so thanks to Elon's model of launch, there's pre-launch revenue. So there's that way businesses can achieve pre-launch revenue, and then they can show their traction with letters of intent, the LOIs that they can gather. So that shows some traction. And then you've got the letters of support. But even more importantly, I think right now, because the Air Force is spending $1 billion on making bets on early stage companies, there are ways to prove traction and capability, and that's really in winning these awards. The phase 1, phase 2, all of that shows credibility, and it's a gateway for further non-dilutive investment from government. So if there's a way to align the strategy of the business with the dollars that our government is doing to support space industry, to commercialize it, then that could be a part of a strategy. But for a lot of companies, we see a lot of component companies, and all of this is great that they can create a component that can scale, that's a small cost, but they have to prove that they can sell hundreds and thousands of them. And so for companies that say, have a component and say, I'm going to put this in every future satellite, and there are going to be thousands and thousands of satellites, you'd have to have a client to show that you could get your component into an entire constellation.
So we got to wrap it up. So guys, it was great to have everyone here today, and I hope you have a little bit of modicum of an understanding of why the space sector could be potentially the ultimate future market and current market. And we have some other space experts as part of the AI Summit, including Colonel Terry Virts and several others. Really wonderful to hear from all of you. You know, a lot of us are on social media. There's ways to keep engaged and keep the conversations going. I want to give a special thank you to Lisa Rich from Xplore and Hemisphere Ventures. Thank you, Lisa. Rick Tumlinson from SpaceFund, AMIR BLACHMAN from Axiom Space, and Molly Labick for always being an awesome collaborator and just being a pro-humanity. Thank you, Molly.